Angle relationships. A line that intersects two or more lines at two different points in a plane is called a transversal. In the picture here, T is the transversal because it intersects lines M and N. This creates 8 angles, and those 8 angles can be grouped up into different types. The ones in between the two lines are called the interior angles. Angle 3, 4, 5, and 6 are interior. Of the interior angles, the ones that are on opposite corners, like angle 3 and angle 5, or angle 4 and angle 6, those are alternate interior angles. The interior angles that are on the same side are consecutive interior angles, like angle 3 and angle 6, or angle 4 and angle 5. They're in between the two lines, and they're on the same side of the transversal. The angles outside the two lines are called exterior angles, like angle 1 and angle 2, and angle 8 and angle 7. They're outside the two lines. The exterior angles on opposite corners are alternate exterior angles, like angle 1 and angle 7, or angle 2 and angle 8. They're on opposite corners outside of the two lines. And finally, the angles that are in the same position are corresponding angles, like angle 1 and angle 5. They're both in the top left of their group. Angle 2 is in the top right, and angle 6 is in the top right. It's corresponding angles. Angle 3 is in the bottom right, angle 7 is in the bottom right. And the last pair, angle 4, which is in the bottom left, and angle 8, which is in the bottom left. When they're in the same position, they're corresponding angles. Identify the transversal connecting each pair of angles. Number 1, angle 9 and angle 13. Remember, the transversal is the line that touches both of the angles, and the only one that does that is line Q. So Q is the transversal. If you're not sure, just draw all the lines. Line P doesn't touch either of the angles. Line N only touches angle 9. Line L only touches angle 13. But line Q is the one that touches both of them. So the transversal is Q. Number 2, angle 5 and angle 14. The line that touches both angles is line L. So L is the transversal. Number 3, angle 4 and angle 6. The line that touches both of those is line P. So P is the transversal. Remember, the transversal is the line that touches both of the angles. If you're not sure, trace over the lines until you find the one that touches both angles. Classify the relationship between each pair of angles as alternate interior, alternate exterior, corresponding, or consecutive interior angles. Number 4, angle 1 and angle 5. Well, those are both in the top left of their set of angles. When they're in the same position, they're corresponding angles. Number 5, angle 6 and angle 14. Well, those are on transversal L, and in their group, they're each in the top right. When they're in the same position like that, they're corresponding angles. Number 6, angle 2 and angle 8. Those are on transversal P, and they're outside the two lines on opposite corners. That's alternate exterior. Number 7, angle 3 and angle 11. Those are on transversal N, and they're each in the bottom right position. When they're in the same position, they're corresponding angles. Number 8, angle 12 and angle 3. Those are on transversal N. They're in between the two lines, and they're on the same side of the transversal. That's consecutive interior angles. When they're on the same side of the transversal, inside the two lines, consecutive interior. Number 9, angle 4 and angle 6. Those are on transversal P, inside the two lines and on opposite corners. That's alternate interior angles. Opposite corners inside the two lines. Number 10, angle 6 and angle 16. Those are on transversal L, and they're in between the two lines on opposite corners. That's alternate interior angles. Number 11, angle 11 and angle 14. Those are on transversal Q, in between the two lines on the same side of the transversal. That's consecutive interior angles. Number 12, angle 10 and angle 16. Those are on transversal Q, outside the two lines on opposite corners. That's alternate exterior angles. So remember, lines that are in the same plane and don't intersect are parallel. Lines that are not in the same plane and don't intersect are skew. Skew lines are not parallel, but they don't intersect. Planes that don't intersect are parallel planes. Make sure you name everything correctly. Bars over segments, 3 non-collinear points for planes. And remember, for the angle types, if they're on opposite corners outside the lines, it's alternate exterior. Opposite corners inside the lines are alternate interior. Same side of the transversal in between the lines are consecutive interior. And if they're in the same position, top right and top right, for example, they're corresponding angles. This is lesson 3.2, Angles and Parallel Lines. Your objectives are to use theorems to determine relationships between angle pairs and use algebra to find angle measures. So when two parallel lines are cut by a transversal, the following pairs of angles are congruent: corresponding angles, alternate interior angles, and alternate exterior angles. Also, consecutive interior angles are supplementary. So just remember, the first three pairs are congruent, so you can make their measures equal, and consecutive interior angles are supplementary, so they'll add up to 180. Another thing to keep in mind here with these pictures is that when parallel lines are cut by a transversal, the acute angles will be the same, the obtuse angles will be the same, and if you have one of each, those will be supplementary. So acutes are equal, obtuses are equal, and one of each adds up to 180. One final thing to remember that you might see is that in addition to those three angle pairs, vertical angles are still congruent. And in addition to consecutive interior angles, linear pairs are also supplementary. In the figure, the measure of angle 9 equals 80, and the measure of angle 5 equals 68. Find the measure of each angle. So in this figure, those two lines are parallel, but lines P and Q are not. So we're going to have to keep these separate. We have two different sets of parallel lines being cut by a transversal. So we have one set of 8 angles on transversal P and another set on transversal Q. So let's keep those separate. Measure of angle 9 is 80 degrees, and the measure of angle 5 is 68 degrees. In the top group, all acute angles will be 80, and to make 180, all obtuse angles would have to be 100. In the bottom set, the ones on transversal Q, all acute angles will be 68 degrees, and all obtuse angles to make 180 will be 112 degrees. So just make sure if you have some lines parallel and some lines not parallel, that you separate the ones that are not parallel. Work them independently of one another. Once you've filled all the angle measures in, go ahead and match up what the questions are asking and give them the angle measure that they're looking for. Sometimes you're given angle measures with algebraic expressions. So, when parallel lines are cut by a transversal, remember, corresponding angles are congruent, alternate interior angles are congruent, alternate exterior angles are congruent, and consecutive interior angles are supplementary. So pair up the angles according to what type they are, and then make your equation. When you're working on these, make sure that you're using just one variable per equation whenever possible. Keep your x's together in one equation, your y's together. You don't want x's and y's in the same equation, or else you'd be having to solve a system of equations. Most of the ones you'll see here, if not all of them, you'll be able to use one variable per equation. So just keep an eye out for those, pair them up. Are they equal, or do they add up to 180? Find the value of the variables in each figure. Explain your reasoning. Well, in number 1, we have a triangle that has a segment inside it that's parallel to the base. If you need to, extend the parallel lines and the transversals so that it looks more like two parallel lines cut by a transversal, and it sometimes makes your angle pairs easier to see. We have two angles with x and one angle with y. Let's look at the x angles first. Those are both in the top right of each group, so they're corresponding angles, and they're congruent. So those measures will be equal to each other. 5x minus 5 equals 4x plus 10. We'll solve that for x. Subtract 4x from each side. X minus 5 equals 10. Add 5 to each side. And x is 15. Since they were corresponding angles, we made their measures equal to each other and solved. Now for y. I have one angle with y in it. I don't want to pair it up with one of the x angles because I want only one variable per equation. So let's substitute 15 in for x and see what 4x plus 10 equals. 4 times 15 plus 10 is 70. So that's a 70-degree angle. Now what special angle pair do those two make? Those are consecutive interior angles. And they're supplementary. So we can add their measures up to equal 180. 6y minus 4 plus 70 equals 180. Since they're consecutive interiors, those are supplementary, so their measures add up to equal 180. Let's solve this. Combine like terms. Negative 4 plus 70 is 66. Subtract 66 from both sides, and divide both sides by 6. Y is 19. So the first angle pair was corresponding angles. Those are congruent, so their measures equal each other. The second pair was consecutive interior angles. Those measures add up to equal 180. Identify the angle pair and set up your equation accordingly. Number 2. Here I have a quadrilateral with one pair of parallel sides, and I've got the 4 angles here. If you have to, extend the parallel lines, and I have one transversal on the left and one transversal on the right. Since the transversals are not parallel, let's keep them separate from each other. Look at the X angles first. Those are on the right-hand transversal. Those are inside the 2 lines, and on the same side of the transversal, those are consecutive interior angles. And they're supplementary, so those angles add up to equal 180. Remember, consecutive interior angles add up to 180. Solve that for x. 15x and 10x make 25x. Subtract 30 from each side, and divide by 25. X is 6. Since they were consecutive interior angles, they're supplementary, so we make their measures add up to equal 180. The other 2 angles are on the other transversal. Those are also between the parallel lines on the same side of the transversal. So those are also consecutive interior angles, which are supplementary. So those angle measures add up to equal 180 as well. 90 plus 18 is 108. Subtract 108 from each side, and divide by 3. Y is 24. So we had consecutive interior angles, which are supplementary, so their measures add up to equal 180. Determine the angle pair, and then either make them equal each other, or make them add up to 180.